Decorative Man here. Logic time. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about premises. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to cover premise. Premise is an extremely important idea in not just in informal logic, but in a lot of places, writings and ideas. It is the essence of the idea itself. We'll get into it, but first, a little song. Yeah. If it will start, yeah, this is great.
Premises are hard to see, but that is just fine with me.
Okay, all right. That was a big build-up for almost nothing. So yes, premises are hard to see, and that's just fine with me. And of course, logic ate me. And pragmatic crystal, good to see you. Hi, PC, prag. Yes. So, what is a premise? Oh, yeah. Okay. It's a statement or proposition that's inferred because it follows a conclusion. If the premise is true, the conclusion must be true. But what is that? What? A premise is what forms the basis of a theory or a plot. Well, that doesn't help. These are all definitions from the internet. Assertion, assumption, basis, ground, presupposition, proposition, thesis. These are all the names for the same thing. Tell me what it is. Okay, so a premise is a statement or assumption on which the argument is based. Ah, finally, a definition that makes some sense. So if you look at a green apple, here's the example given online. If you look at a green apple and you say the apple is sour, then the premise could be that green apples or are sour based on previous experience with green apples and them being sour. All statements are premises to some extent. I actually, maybe all statements are premises. Questions, and this is very important. It's something that when I learned it, when I found out it, it really stuck with me that questions themselves contain premises. So the question has in it a built-in assumption about reality. Now, you'll encounter this with of course, the logical fallacy of a loaded question, which we may or may not be familiar with. So I'll go over, and of course, we'll be going into more logical fallacies later on. But the logical fallacy of a loaded question is is given best as an example. One classic example is the question is, "Have you stopped beating your wife?" So this is loaded because, well, there's problems with the question. The question infers some things. It infers that you are and have been beating your wife. So you've been performing this action on somebody that you are married to, that you would designate as wife. So it assumes that you're married and assumes that you have been beating on her, but you recently stopped, and is asking you when you stopped doing that. When did you stop beating your wife? This is a loaded question because all these premises are contained in there. You're assuming I have a wife, you're assuming I beat her. These are not necessarily fair assumptions to make. They might be true, they might be false, but by asking me this question, you're assuming these things are true. So, another example that the skeptical person might find an apologist make is, well, creation requires a creator. Well, duh, but you're calling it creation, so you're already implying that there's a creator. You don't need to say the thing. You already have said the implication by calling it creation in the first place. Uh, or a painting requires a painter. Well, yeah, again, this kind of is implicit in the word. So these are all kind of assumptions that are made, and when you say things, you necessarily are saying something that ideally that you think is true. Of course, you might be lying, but we'll get into that a bit. And so then you're building the rest of the argument that you're going to make or that you are making. And of course, as I talked to in Foundations, that arguments are attempts to convince the other person of your idea, whether you're aware that you're trying to do that or not. And so that's the type of dialogue that we're going to be focusing on within Informal Logic, is what is known as the persuasion dialogue. I might accidentally refer to it as persuasionary because that's my brain does weird things. So, but I'm trying to persuade you with an idea. I'm trying to persuade you that this is true. I'm trying to persuade you to buy something or go somewhere or do something or not do something. And so this is a persuasionary, there you go, dialogue. I'm trying to persuade you, so I'm trying to argue that you should do this. Here's good reasons to do it, or here's bad reasons to not do it, or whatever. So you should buckle your seatbelt, even when you're going to drive, because you don't want to get a ticket for not doing that. So there's a reason to do it. There's other reasons, but that's the reason I'm giving you. So the consequence of you not doing it is something that you want to avoid. So therefore, you shouldn't do this. You should, in this case, buckle your seatbelt to avoid this negative consequence. And that can be very effective rhetoric. That can be very effective in convincing people to do or not to do any given action. So pay your taxes or else they'll come and, arrest you, whoever they is, So, okay, that's pretty effective. They don't mess around. They when the government owes you money, man, they take their time. But when you owe them money, they're, hi, how's it going? Like what? So nice little double standard, isn't it? The bank owes you money, they can take however long they want. You owe the bank money, you'll be hearing immediately from them. So you need something repaired in your on your property that you rent. You call it in. They take their sweet time to come out and fix it if they feel like it. But the moment that you're a little bit late for rent, they're calling you. So, anyways, so the premise is the statement where you are in many cases assuming that this statement is true. You're presenting it as a truth, and you're saying, okay, here is this first premise laid out, if you will, and then we say P1. We shorten premise to the letter P, and then we put the number 1 there, and usually we put a colon after that, and then a space, and then the statement itself, and that's premise 1. And we'll get into syllogisms later, but focusing on premise. So it's the beginning of a story, really, like the premise of a story, like, okay, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So the premise is she's hungry. She goes into this house. She finds things to eat. She does that. She finds a place to sleep. She does that. And then the bears come home and eat her, because that's what bears would do. But no, they have a dialogue instead. And so, okay, the premise of the story is that she's hungry. That's the very basic premise of a story. More logic, Scott Duke. Yes, correct. More logic indeed. So you went for a walk. That's a statement that is, well, it's a premise because it might not be true that you went for a walk, but in the framework of informal logic, and sometimes I'll just say logic, but I'll try to say the statement is seen as true, whether or not in reality it is true. We can get to that later, but the statement is seen as this is a fact of reality. So when you read it or write it or say it or hear it, you're saying, okay, I'm kind of suspending disbelief, if you will. I'm assuming that for sake of argument, you might hear that phrase, that this statement is true. So you went for a walk. I didn't, but okay, I went for a walk. Fine. That's the first statement. What's the next statement? And you saw a store. Okay. This assumes a lot of things. It's assuming that I can go for a walk. It assumes that I went for a walk. And it assumes I can see. It assumes that I know what a store is. It assumes there are stores. So, but all of that is asserted to be correct in the scenario. It is assumed to be true because that's essentially the underlying framework of the premise is to say, look, here's what's going on. And we can get to whether or not you believe it later on, but just let me tell essentially a short story, if you will. So you went for a walk, you saw the store, and it was across the street, and you were so hungry that you rushed to go get something to eat and didn't notice the car coming towards you at great speed. Now, what's going to happen in the story? We can leave it there. It's suspenseful. Well, he's going to get hit by the car. Is he going to avoid the car? But okay, so you're walking where doesn't matter. You're walking somewhere. You notice the store. It happens to be across a street. We're assuming that the person knows what a street is. We're assuming that people understand the phrase across the street. We're assuming a lot of things due to natural language. And ultimately, we're assuming that all of this is true so that we can get to the conclusion of the story. Or in this case, the cliffhanger of the story, where something unexpected happened. Oh, but you didn't notice, you didn't see, you didn't pay attention, you didn't look both ways before crossing the street. And so here comes a car speeding towards you. And so this is a thing that you want to avoid. Ideally, we would think, because, well, what does speeding car coming towards you usually mean in these scenarios? Well, it doesn't end well usually. You're going to get hit. Are you going to get killed? Are you going to get hurt? We don't know yet because the story is left up in the air, but it's scary, it's suspenseful, and so, okay, we're invested, right? But to get there, we had to allow for that premise to be true. We had to allow that you took a walk is a true statement, even if in reality it's not true. And you go, but I want to know what's true and false. Yes, we'll get there later. But for now, we're examining the structure of argumentations, and mostly I'm focusing on premise and how this works. There you go. Well, let's remove it one step from you personally, because you won't usually see that written out. You won't see it directed at the reader, if you will. You did this. No, I didn't. Because you immediately you'll object. I didn't do what? So we'll slot in a name. We could slot in a variable. We could say X did Z. And you're like, well, X and Z, that's too abstract. What is that? These are variables. It could be any, X could be something, Z could be something, and that's too synthetic, and we want to focus on more real things. So Bob did action of walking. Okay. And so we're picturing in our mind a scenario with somebody that we're deciding is Bob, and their action is walking. We're picturing that happening in our heads, and okay, fine. So Bob walked somewhere. In this case, he walked and saw a store across the street, but Bob didn't notice when he went to cross the street because he was so hungry. He was focused on his hunger that and assumed, of course, Bob is assuming that there's food in the store, and implicitly, us as readers, listeners to this argument, we're assuming that Bob's going to the store because he's hungry. He was focused. He was so hungry that he didn't notice. Well, how do we know that Bob was hungry? Well, because we're being told. So this is the all-seeing, all-knowing narrator that's observing the story, if you will. And you'll see this all the time in books and movies and TV shows where the camera is the all-seeing narrator, if you will. I notice that there's a camera in front of me only because I'm looking at it, but eventually, and after a while, I'm not looking at it, and I'm kind of like, I'm talking to the other person, and we as the audience are ignoring the fact that there's a giant camera aimed at these people, And so we're the all-seeing observer, and we're watching their story unfold. So we're watching Bob walk down the street. We're watching as he crosses the road to get to the store. Maybe we were given an audio cue that he's hungry, like a rumbling in his stomach. Maybe he looked down and was like, He looked over and saw maybe the store says ice cream or something on it to give us even more visual clues. Or maybe he's drooling, whatever. And he starts to cross the street, and then you hear, and he turns, here comes a car, or maybe a truck to make it even more exciting, more interesting, more scary, because it's going to be Isekai. He's going to get sent into another world after this, whatever, So a lot of that is things that we just kind of fill in. And we do that just automatically. Going to something that we all have examined, I would think, at some point or the other, because we're skeptic-minded people that are interested in these things, religion, the Bible, okay? As an example of the all-seeing narrator. Jesus goes into the desert. Why? I don't know, but that's what he's doing. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but if all the disciples are over here doing their thing, I don't even know where they are right now. I don't know who's where, whatever they're doing, because we're not told that. Jesus just like, I'm going to go to the desert. Okay. Does he tell him? I don't even remember. I'd have to read the whole story now. But from memory, it's like, I remember Jesus goes into the desert and then things happen in the desert. But who's recording this? How do we, who's, somebody has to know that he's doing this in order to write it down later. But you're not supposed to think about that. You're just supposed to be you're supposed to be reading it and be like, yes, okay, yeah, Jesus went to the desert and, and he was, all this different stuff happened, and you're not supposed to do what the skeptic does and say, hold on, how do we know that he went to the desert? You're supposed to not do that. But when you're a skeptic, you do that. And then, of course, the person goes, well, but, he told somebody, even though it doesn't say that he told anybody, and because that's the only explanation you could think of, is like, well, Jesus doesn't write it down himself because Jesus doesn't write down stuff, so it's very odd, but it is a narrative format that we're very used to. We get to see the person doing things, and we also get to see inside their head. We get to see what they're thinking and feeling. And that's something that you can't do other than in a book or movie or TV. You don't get to see inside my head. I don't get to see inside your head. So that gives us a perspective that we wouldn't otherwise have. And then sometimes, and many times, it will shift from this one person to some other character, and we'll follow them for a while. And now this person still exists. They're doing whatever, but they don't matter because they're not on the screen anymore. They stop existing. We're focusing on, what's the bad guy up to? Oh, back to the hero, back to the bad guy. So in Marvel's Avengers, you switch between the Avengers and what Loki is doing. Why? Well, because we want to know what Loki is doing, because we want to know what he's up to, because that will give us some information that we know that they don't know, but we know it. We know, that he's building the thing and he's got this plan, and we know what that is, but they don't know it. And how are they going to figure that out? What are they going to do to stop them all? And so and then of course the murder mystery. You watch the entire murder happen. You get to see who did it, all these things, and then you get to see the person come in and figure it all out. Or there's a very formulaic, say, Matlock. I used to watch Matlock all the time, and Matlock, is this lawyer. He sends this guy out to go make some investigations. Sometimes he does it, but they ask questions, they get into trouble, and they find out who did it. And so at the end, he always finds out who really did it, and it's never the person that he's defending, or it's rarely the person he's defending. But he gets the actual truth. He catches the real person. And not that he needs to do that to win the case. And then, and it's the same thing every time. Agatha in Murder, She Wrote, she always finds the culprit, clues, and so why do we watch it? We know how it's going to end, or MacGyver, he gets into some situation and then he builds some weird thing and he gets himself out of the situation. But we know what's going to happen, and it happens every time, but it happens in different ways, and we're invested for whatever it's interesting to us. I don't know why, but all of that is built on these hidden premises that we all implicitly accept as real, even if, and maybe sometimes especially if, they're not actually real. That we just, our brains are just wired to accept what people say to us at some level. And it's kind of a trick of communication that you listening to me now, you have to accept that what I'm telling you is true at some level. Now, you could, make sure, go Google it up and, fact check it, throw it at AIs or whatever the hell you want to do, and analyze the hell out of it and be like, well, Deconverted, you said this thing and that's not quite how it says it here. And, you can be as picky as you want. Hopefully you are. I'd be interested in that. But still, in order to have a conversation with somebody, you grant them this innocent idea that what they're saying is true to you. And this is what I call the social contract. That when somebody says, I say, how was your day? And they say, fine. It's just a nicety that we exchange. They probably aren't fine. Maybe they've had a rough day and like, I'm okay. I mean, I don't know. It's fine. I exist. What do you want me to say? I don't know. And so we grant them that it's true. It's like, I went to go eat somewhere yesterday, and we just, of course you went somewhere to eat. There's no reason to question that, right? Maybe they didn't. Maybe they're lying to you. But that's not our first instinct, if you will. When we listen to people and we're talking to somebody, we assume that they're telling us the truth. And that's the premise of the premise. And so everything you say is a premise. It's a statement built on assumptions that you're making about yourself, the other person, the world, the reality that we exist in. It's all built on one assumption after the other. Maybe it's assumptions all the way down. And those assumptions could be true, but they could also all be wrong. Yikes. So we'll get into next time. We'll get into how do we figure out if something is right or wrong. You know, the simple stuff of that whole thing of analyzing. But I think that unless you're, if you have questions on what is a premise, assertion. Okay, we got a question. Hey, I see. I pay attention to chat. I get a question. It's an assertion. How do assertion relate to premises? Yes, very good. Well, assertion is kind of another name for a premise in a way. There's a different way to look at it though, because a premise is something that you're building things on, whereas an assertion is a statement about how things are. So, he's dead. That's an assertion. He will die is kind of a premise. And what's the difference? They're so interlinked that it's. I think that would be difficult to really unravel. An assertion usually, I would say, relates to statements made about the reality of the world that we exist in, rather than a premise is used to kind of like a story. It's kind of like a narrative device, and the two, like I say, can intertwine. So Bob walked down the street, was really hungry, crossed the street, didn't notice the car speeding towards him because he was so focused on being hungry. There's no real assertion being made there. Not really. Tentatively, kind of, but not really. But if I said, well, of course, as we know, cars don't exist, I've made an assertion that kind of breaks from the story. It talks about reality now. I'm like, what do you mean cars don't exist? And well, it doesn't make sense. Why would you say that? And now, wait, You're breaking. Well, we might say it's breaking the fourth wall or something like that. You've kind of, so you're asserting something as true, and it's kind of like, wait, is that true? So Jesus goes into the desert. This is all a story. And we can see it as a story. It's all premises built on things. But if we say, and as you know, Jesus really existed, that's an assertion about reality. Because I'm fine with accepting these ideas of a person named Jesus going into the desert as all story. That's fine. But now you've asserted something about reality. You've said that the character that I'm reading about or hearing about is actually a real human being. Whether they exist now or in the past or whatever, is another story. But I think that would be the way to view it, is that assertions are statements of things that you want to be seen as a fact, whether they're a fact or not. And so I don't know if I explained that well enough, but hopefully I did. So yeah, it's assertion versus premise. And I know that thinking back on videos I've analyzed, where I go, well, that's just an assertion. You've just asserted that as being true. This happens with presupposition all the time of presups. The presup apologist is just like, oh, of course there's a God. And they're so smug. How do you know that? Your worldview this, your worldview that. Oh, how do you know? How do you know? How do you know? Could you be wrong? And they're so smug and so irritating and annoying and arrogant. And they make little weird noises at you. Do you know that's true? oh, in your world, and it's just you want to punch them in the face, you know? These are all assertions that they're making about the true nature of reality as if they could know such a thing, or as if they do know that. And it's like, look, maybe it's true, but you need to demonstrate that. Well, you didn't test it yourself, so you don't really know that water freezes when it gets cold enough. I mean, this is built on an assumption of all sorts of things. Like you can only know something if you yourself do the experiment. That's the implicit premise there. So your assertion of how reality functions is that I can only make statements if I've performed all the experiments to prove that those statements are true. Yes. Okay. What about you, in your view of reality? Because you're telling me my view. That's nice. I don't know how you know my view, but you're telling me this about me. How does your thing work? Well, see, in my view of reality, it doesn't matter. I don't need to do these experiments because I could know that God exists and allows for water to get frozen, and I can have faith in people. Oh, okay, so you're saying that, between having the facts, that the only way to gain fact is to do the experiment myself, which is something you think must be done, versus I can just believe stuff. Okay, yeah, all right, yeah. Sure, you could just believe stuff, but then why not believe that your system might have flaws in it? Because my system doesn't have a flaw. Nom, 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 nom. And that's the precept I'm doing. This is the straw man precept. Damn good question. Whew. So yeah, hopefully that answer. I don't know that, because like I said, in the start of this, I don't know if I'm doing this good or not. So yeah, that premises are the building blocks of our stories and arguments. Assertions are related in a way. Maybe we'll have to do a whole nother thing on that. Flute whistle. I'm a theist. Just heads up before I question. Sure, absolutely. We're focusing on informal logic, although, I bring in religion a little bit, because that's what I do on my channel. But okay, provide your question, I guess. My focus here is on premises and informal logic in this particular video, but I'll try to answer the question. Like I said, Scott, I don't know. Did that answer your question? Did you want more from that, or are you happy with that answer? Or maybe you're unhappy with the answer. I don't know. Let me know. But yeah, I was just about to wrap up. So, but yeah, real quick, Flute. Now we have to wait for Flute to type out their question. Maybe they're like, well, maybe it's not. I don't know. What else can I say about premise? Will they do that? Do I have any other final thoughts about premise? No, I don't. I can't think of anything more to say about premises. I think I've run the well dry. Hopefully, I've expanded our understanding of them. And again, I don't know, because none of this is scripted, and I'm not an educator, and there's better stuff out there that covers this stuff, but I'm trying my best. I want to see how this goes, and see if I continue this series or not. But yeah, and meanwhile, I'm saying all this in hopes that Flute Whistle will type out their question so I can read it and answer it. So I don't know how long we're going to give them to do that here before I go, well, I'm done. This isn't entertaining for anybody else now. We're just waiting. No? Okay. I don't. Next time it's about a different topic. Oh, okay. Oh man, it's all right. Next time, Yeah. Sure. Email me any questions about this topic, in particular, informal logic. And if you want to talk about a different topic, or you want to debate, discuss, whatever, yada yada yada, let me know. Um, I want to talk about free will and nature laws. Okay. Sure. I'm not sure how much I know about either of those things, but I can tell you whether or not the arguments have logical fallacies. So I can definitely do that. Email me for any and all things deconvertedman1@gmail.com. And yeah, hopefully you learned something from this. And if you have any questions, like Scott, that was a very good question. And hopefully I answered it. Let me know in the comments, and we'll see you next time. At least that's my premise. Oh, and I didn't mention lobsters. Oh, no, not even once. No.